Hello everyone, I am the Meta Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Modern Horizons 2, Sythis Harvest's Hand. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Sythis is a 1/2 enchantment nymph for 1 green and 1 white. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. A typical Enchantress building around Sythis can either be incredibly easy or very challenging. Don't get me wrong, the only challenge is deciding in which direction to take this engine. While Sythis is definitely a very versatile commander, I chose a more mid-range beatdown approach. The deck aims to draw into a ton of cards in order to never run out of steam. This steam will fuel all the other enchantments we'll be playing in order to eventually animate them, pump them up, and then smash face with them. There are a couple of alternate win cons peppered in the deck just in case we face any opponents protected against beatdown strategies. So let's start with the cards most similar to Sythis, the other enchantments. The deck aims to draw into a ton of cards, so let's start there. Sythis only costs 2 mana, so she doesn't need to be so intensely protected. Plus she's got plenty of substitutes in the deck as well. These being Argothian Enchantress, Mesa Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, Verduran Enchantress, and Enchantress's Presence. What's great about Sythis is that she's also an enchantment, so if you get any of these cards out first, she'll draw you some cards even upon casting. Each of these permanents draws us a card when we cast an enchantment. That's a very important distinction which we'll soon see. But all of these cards are relatively cheap to cast and they're also very plentiful, so it's very easy to draw anywhere between 2 to 4 cards with each enchantment you cast. Now, Eidolon of Blossoms and Citizen Champion do something similar but only when an enchantment enters the battlefield, and therein lies the distinction. While they might seem similar in function to Sythis and the other 5 Enchantress effects, I actually prefer these more. There are a couple of enchantments in this deck that aren't cast, so these become much stronger engines, which is probably why there's fewer of them. Since the deck's main win con is beatdown, the champion is even better here since it gets bigger with each enchantment that enters the battlefield under our control. For example, Heliod God of the Sun is an indestructible 5/6 beater when devotion is met, but he also gives all of our creatures vigilance and is one of the best cards in this deck for that very reason. Not only is Heliod an enchantment that triggers most of the effects in the deck, but he creates enchantment creatures as well. Not only are these 2/1s additional creatures to go wide with, but they'll trigger Eidolon of Blossoms and Citizen Champion even if they don't trigger the Enchantresses. So not only are we growing our army, but we're increasing our enchantment count as well, which is also relevant. We'll see why in a bit. Ephemerith Enchantress draws us a card whenever an enchantment we control is destroyed. This means that every time one of Heliod's cleric tokens die, we draw a card. If someone wipes the board of enchantments, we'll draw into a ton of cards also. So this puts opponents in a tight spot. Leave our engine along or blow it all up and have us dig super deep into our library, unless they destroy the Enchantress first, of course. Calyx Destiny's Hands doesn't provide card draw per se, but at least we can filter our first 4 cards. Calyx might seem like an underwhelming planeswalker, but that's because his use is too niche, which is great because this deck is his perfect niche. We can also turn any of our enchantments into a prison, and his ultimate is pretty much a replenish, which isn't that difficult to achieve. We're pretty much always +1ing him, and even if we were to need to exile something, we do. But once he's beyond 7 loyalty, mass enchantment removal should no longer worry us. Sylvan Library is straight up card draw on a green enchantment. It's super cheap to cast, and thanks to Sythis we'll be gaining quite a lot of life, so we'll be able to keep more than 1 card in our hand from it more often than not. In fact, such as the amount of card we draw, that Reliquary Tower is pretty much a no-brainer here. Actually, I take that back. You can actually play around with drawing into a ton of cards and then discarding a ton of enchantments into the graveyard in order to reanimate them later on in your end step. However, while that can be incredibly explosive, it's also incredibly risky. As mentioned with Heliod, Eidolon of Blossoms, and Citizen Champion, having enchantments enter the battlefield is better than casting them, since it's a better engine, especially when it comes to growing our army. Johnny's Chosen, Archon of Sun's Grace, and Sigil of the Empty Throne are more synergistic ways to achieve this. The creatures trigger identically to the Eidolon and Champion whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, so Heliod creating 2/1 enchantment creatures will trigger these, and we can get 2/2 cats and 2/2 Pegasi as well, Pegasi that fly on their own and have lifelink thanks to the Archon. The enchantment on the other hand only triggers when an enchantment is cast, but it's a good trade-off since it creates 4/4 angels. Opalescence and Starfield of Nyx don't create tokens per se, but they turn our non-aura enchantments into creatures. With all of the enchantments we'll have in play, this will make our army appear seemingly out of nowhere. Thanks to these 2 enchantments, we can overwhelm the board in practically one fell swoop if we have enough enchantments and creatures. The Starfield is even better since it animates an enchantment at the beginning of our upkeep, so it can help us recover enchantments from the graveyard. Nylea, God of the Hunt, and True Conviction are some more enchantments to make our army more dangerous. Nylea, an indestructible 6/6 beater when devotion is met, gives our creatures trample but has the potential of pumping up a creature as a mana sink. True Conviction might seem a bit uncomfortable to cast, but not so much as this deck. Giving our creatures double strike is no joke. The lifelink is just icing on the cake. This means we can keep constantly swinging into our opponents since we'll gain a ton of life. So if we get attacked in retaliation, we won't lose as much life as they will. Besides, Nylea, Hem of the Gods, and Nettlecyst are the other ways to pump a single creature, and they're quite the pump. Nettlecyst is the better of the two since it also counts artifacts, which isn't that big a deal since there are only 4 artifacts in the entire deck. Plus, it has Living Weapon, so it can already enter as an XX Phyrexian Germ for just 3 mana. The Helm is no piece of junk though, since it can seriously pump any creature we control for just 2 mana. Since they're artifacts, they won't die along with the creature they're attached to, unlike auras. That's why I'm not running auras with similar effects in the deck. Rogue's Passage makes it even easier to one-shot someone. Equipping Sythis with either of these equipment can then swinging it unopposed can spell imminent doom to whoever you're smacking, especially if she has double strike or any other pump. However, not every opponent can be defeated via combat. That's why Sythis Crawler and Helix Pinnacle are also included in the deck. With the insane amount of cards we're drawing in the deck, the Crawler will whittle down opponents' life totals very quickly, and then we can finish them off with some creatures or by simply continuing to draw cards off of our Enchantress effects. The Pinnacle requires a whopping 100 mana and surviving until our next upkeep to win us the game. However, the deck is able to generate such vast amounts of mana that we can potentially achieve this in a couple of turns, especially if we're facing against control or stacks decks that slow down the game and make combat or casting spells difficult. We can just sink all of our available mana into this at the end of each turn before ours and potentially win. Now that we've seen how we're digging through our deck and assembling our armies, this game ain't free, so we have to generate quite a lot of mana to pay for all these things. Or maybe reduce their costs altogether with Herald of the Pantheon, Starfield Mystic, and Starnheim Courser. As a bonus, the Herald also gains us 1 life when we cast an enchantment similar to Sythis does. The Mystic gets bigger when enchantment we control gets destroyed, which synergizes with Heliod, as well as when someone blows up all of our enchantments. While reducing the generic cost of our enchantments can go a long way, especially since 42% of this deck is enchantments, actual mana generation like Sanctum Weaver and Seren's Sanctum are included as well. Obviously, these are going to tap down for a ton of mana in the deck. Unfortunately, the Sanctum is over $300 as of the making of this video because WotC decided to add more sets to the reserve list after Chronicles instead of just leaving it at the early sets, but I digress. So if you don't already have it, aren't playing online, or won't proxy it, you don't need it for the deck to run. Burgeoning, Exploration, and Dryad of the Elysian Grove are some cheap enchantments that can really accelerate us. Drawing so many cards but playing only 1 land is pretty inefficient. That's why Burgeoning is the better of these since it allows us to play potentially 3 more lands from our hand outside of our turn, which is pretty busted. Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits, my favorite ramp trifecta, don't need any conditions to ramp us a double-type land, so their inclusion is pretty self-explanatory. Mirari's Wake, Mana Reflection, and Nyxbloom Agent, they make it a point to have those mana sources generate a ton of mana. As a bonus, Mirari's Wake also functions as a boon to all of our creatures. Keep in mind that math is going to be very important when we are having our lands tap for just more than 1 mana. If you have all 3 of these effects on the battlefield at once, first have Mirari's Wake make that land tap for the additional mana. Then have Mana Reflection and Nyxbloom Ancient multiply that. Otherwise, you'll be generating less mana the other way around, especially when the enchanted land has auras that our lands tap for additional mana for. There are plenty of these in the deck, so first let's see the ones that give more mana than what they cost. Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl. Each of these only costs 1 mana but have our land tap for an additional mana, so they're the best in terms of mana generation to cost ratio. The next ones, Wolf, Willow Haven, Fertile Ground, and Overgrowth, cost the same as the amount of mana they make the land tap for. Again, this is assuming no other effects, just the land purely tapping for just 1 mana. But the first 2 costing 2 and generating 2 mana, while the latter costs 3 and gets us 3 mana, is still decently balanced. Especially the first one, since you can pay 5 and sacrifice it in a pinch to create a wolf token. The next ones, Find the Path, Gift of Paradise, New Horizons, Sheltered Eyrie, Verdant Haven, and Weirding Wood each cost 3 to cast but have our lands tap for 2 mana. While not as epic as Overgrowth, they're still incredibly useful because they're still cheap to cast, even more so with cost reducers. They also trigger all of our enchantment effects. Some of these also have other effects such as venturing into the dungeon, gaining us life, pumping a creature, or investigating, but these are just slight bonuses. The final ones, Dawn's Reflection and Market Festival, are similar to these because they have the enchanted land tap for 1 less mana than what it costs to cast them. They're still amazing since tapping down a single land for 3 mana is no joke, especially when lands are rarely targeted in Commander, especially basic lands, which are harder to hit anyways. That being said, keep in mind what I mentioned earlier with the additional effects and multiplicative effects when it comes to mana. Always do the additive mana before you then multiply how much mana will be added to your mana pool. While the deck is more aggressive than it isn't, the mid-range aspect comes from the disruptive effects in it. Aura Shards and Aura Silence provide some nicer stacks pieces, with the latter taxing artifacts and enchantments, greatly slowing down opponents, while the former blows up an artifact or enchantment whenever a creature we control enters the battlefield. This is incredibly oppressive with our token creation engines. Consulate Crackdown imprisons all of opponents' artifacts altogether. It is a bit weaker since getting rid of it gets them back their artifacts, but is still amazing against mana rocks, especially treasure tokens, and any artifact heavy deck. Saga of the Dryads and Darksteel Mutation are some amazing ways at depriving our opponents of their commanders. Since they're not changing zones, it's going to be very difficult to get them back short of blowing up the enchantment. Being a land makes it harder to interact with them being indestructible, but both are incredibly oppressive against decks that are too reliant on their commander. Greater Auramancy, Sterling Grove, and Privileged Position help protect our enchantments from opponents' own interaction. The first two combined protect all of our enchantments from any type of spot removal, while any of those combined with Privileged Position will protect our entire board from targeted effects. Having any combination of these is so epic that Mirage Mirror, while included in the deck as a way to copy absolutely any artifact, creature, or enchantment in play, is especially useful when copying any of these in response to a targeted spell or effect, if you're able to do this until you get any of the other card and you're set. You can also use it to copy any other Enchantress effect or beater, so this is hands down the most versatile card in the entire deck. Island Sanctuary and Sphere of Safety are some more protective effects, but for ourselves. Since we're drawing into a ton of cards from our Enchantress effects, we can skip our card draw during our draw step with Island Sanctuary in order to not get attacked by creatures without flying or island walk. This is incredibly useful against other aggro decks, since we can then continuously attack into players that won't be able to attack into us anyways. Same with Sphere of Safety. It's going to cost so much mana to attack us with even a single creature that it might not even be worth it. Destiny Spinner helps protect our enchantments and creature spells from getting countered. Not only that, but it's an enchantment itself, which is definitely a bonus. If that weren't enough of a bonus, it's also a mana sink to animate our lands to become creatures with power and toughness each equal to the amount of art enchantments we control, similarly to previously mentioned Hum of the Gods. Oh, and they have haste too. So once we have a critical mass of enchantments and mana production, we can swing in with huge land elementals. This card is an all-star here. Dowsing Shaman, Hall of Healer's Generosity, and Replenish are included for when we do have our enchantments dealt with. Replenish is absolutely busted here. While it is a $100+ card, its gold-bordered version is only about 25% of that, so get that version instead. Casting a Replenish after someone wipes the board is incredibly satisfying. Or, as I mentioned earlier, if you cast it the turn after you discard down to maximum hand size by filling your graveyard with a ton of enchantments you drew into. Dowsing Shaman recovers the enchantment to our hand while Hall of Healer's Generosity top decks it. What's great about these reusable effects in particular is their interaction with Urza's Saga. Since it's not a spell, it won't trigger enchantresses that care about enchantments being cast, but it will trigger those that care about enchantments entering the battlefield. Granted, the deck only has one potential target for Urza's Saga's third chapter, but its use here is more for its nature as an enchantment land that can be recurred. When it gets sacrificed, we can just recover it and play it again, triggering those effects. Plus, since it's a land, it doesn't take up a slot in the deck, so you can quite get the engine going with it. Flawless Maneuver, Heroic Intervention, and Teferi's Protection aren't as synergistic as the previous cards, but they're important nonetheless at protecting our board state from opponents' interaction. Keep in mind that Flawless Maneuver will protect our enchantments turned creatures by Opalescence and Starfield of Nyx, but not themselves since they don't animate themselves. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 8 fetch lands: Savannah, Temple Garden, Arctic Treeline, Canopy Vista, Scattered Groves, Sunpetal Grove, Wooded Bastion, Command Tower, Bountiful Promenade, Brushland, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 4 of each basic land. As with all of my deck techs, you don't need the more expensive fetch lands, Savannah or Serra Sanctum if you're not playing online or proxying them. You can swap them out for a bunch of substitutes and the deck will still run just fine. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Sythis Harvest's hand. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Sythis is just a 2-color enchantress you can have in the command zone. Since she's an acceleration engine and life gain engine, you can pretty much build her however you want. You can build a mid-range deck like I did, you can build an excruciatingly oppressive stacks deck, or you can do something else entirely. I chose this route because it's the one I feel like will be explored less. Playing the deck against opponents for the first time left them not knowing what we were going to do apart from casting enchantments. But what kind of enchantments? What kind of interaction? So it does bring an advantage until they start seeing the key pieces and then figuring it out. But having alternate win cons helps out with that as well, especially making the deck resilient against its weakness. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps with the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.